The champagne tasted bitter as I watched my fiancé's lips pressed against hers. Not just a friendly peck, but the kind of kiss that redefines everything. I shifted uncomfortably in my black cocktail dress, feeling suddenly out of place at the law firm's anniversary event. Everything had been perfect just a few hours ago. My hair styled in soft waves that Jack always said he loved. The ring on my finger caught the light, reflecting with every small movement of my hand. Senior partners had been introducing me as the brilliant digital forensics expert and Jack's partner. I felt a surge of pride standing by his side as he approached his long-awaited promotion. The Starlight Grand Hotel ballroom glittered with success and ambition. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting their light on the faces of the city's legal elite. I had helped Jack rehearse his speech for weeks. Tonight was supposed to be ours, a celebration of our future together as he reached this career milestone. Emma, I was just telling Michael about your work on the Henderson case, Jack's boss, Michael Roberts, said as I approached their circle. We might need your expertise on something similar. I smiled and joined their conversation, explaining how I had traced digital evidence that others had missed. Jack's hand rested possessively on my lower back, a gesture that usually made me feel secure, but tonight it felt more controlling than comforting. Quite the power couple, someone remarked, raising a glass. That was when I noticed her for the first time, Vanessa Cole, Jack's ex from law school, now a rising star at Silicon Innovations, one of the firm's largest clients. She was wearing a striking red dress that stood out among the sea of black and navy suits. Her entrance shifted the energy in the room, or maybe it was just Jack. His hand dropped from my back, and his focus scattered. "Isn't that Vanessa?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Is it?" he replied, his eyes avoiding mine. But the way he was watching her, the way his attention drifted to her across the room, told me everything. Throughout the evening, I saw them exchange glances while at the bar, their hands brushing longer than necessary. When they thought no one was looking, they shared private jokes that made her touch his arm and him lean in a little too closely. Each moment I witnessed felt like evidence, each glance and whispered laugh adding to the case I was unknowingly building in my mind. I didn't want to believe it, but my instincts were starting to speak louder than my heart. "Jack seems a little distracted tonight," Michael remarked as we discussed the potential security contract. "Big night. For him, I suppose. Nerves getting to him, huh?" "Must be," I replied, watching Jack check his phone and disappear through a side door. Vanessa followed just 2 minutes later. "Excuse me, I'll be right back. I just need to wish him luck before his speech," I said politely to Michael, trying to hide the unease building in my chest. "Of course, partners need support in these moments," Michael smiled knowingly. I moved through the crowd, smiling at familiar faces as my heart raced. A service corridor extended from the side entrance. The voices of Jack and Vanessa echoed from around the corner. I had always kept a habit of documenting everything, and before I realized it, I had pulled out my phone and opened the recording app. "We can't keep doing this." Jack's voice was low, urgent. "She's right outside," Vanessa replied. "You promised me it would be over after this. How much longer?" Timing isn't right. After the promotion, I'll have more security. I can break it to her gently. And to us," Jack responded, his tone cold. "What about our plans for this weekend? The cabin?" "I'll tell her I have a work retreat," he added, and I felt the cold realization hit me. He was planning to lie about everything. My hand instinctively touched the engagement ring he'd given me 6 months ago, a symbol of our future, or so I thought. I stepped closer, my back against the wall, phone recording quietly in my hand. "After tonight, things will be different," Jack promised. His words struck with a chilling finality. "What about her?" Vanessa asked, and I heard the touch of bitterness in her voice. "She doesn't suspect anything." Jack laughed softly. "Emma's brilliant with computers, but she's trusting to a fault. She believes everything I tell her." I couldn't move. My feet felt like they were glued to the floor, but I forced myself to peer around the corner. What I saw froze me. Jack was pressing Vanessa against the wall, kissing her with the kind of familiarity that spoke volumes. His hand cradled her face, just like he did mine that morning. Something sharp and cold surged through me. And in that moment, I didn't feel tears or screams, but a quiet, unsettling calm. The same kind of calm I felt when I cracked difficult cases. My mind shifted into overdrive, methodical and detached. I stepped back silently, stopped the recording, and returned to the ballroom. "Did you find him?" Michael asked when I rejoined the group. I forced a smile, trying to mask the chaos stirring inside me. "Not yet," I replied smoothly, "but I did want to discuss those security protocols further. I have some ideas that might interest your firm." I launched into the details of a comprehensive security plan, detailing the risks of the firm's digital infrastructure. I spoke with steady conviction, making my points clear and logical, even though inside I was unraveling. I was cataloging the lies, the betrayals, and already calculating my exit strategy. At this point, it wasn't about saving our relationship. It was about reclaiming my own sense of control. "You've given us a lot to think about," Michael said, clearly impressed. "Let's schedule a proper meeting next week." "Of course," I nodded. I excused myself quickly, spotting Jack as he returned to the ballroom, adjusting his tie. Vanessa, though, emerged from a different door moments later, fresh lipstick applied, her reflection in the bathroom's marble sanctuary. I leaned against the cool counter, staring at my reflection. The woman in the mirror seemed composed, almost serene, despite the storm that had just erupted in my life. I splashed cold water on my wrists, trying to ground myself, then took 3 deep breaths. As I did, I slipped the diamond ring off my finger and placed it in my clutch. 5 years together, reduced to a small, cold stone in a velvet box. I texted Sarah, my roommate, who I'd moved in with before my relationship with Jack began. The text read, "Code Titanium." It was our emergency signal, something we'd agreed on back in college for moments like these. Within 3 minutes, my phone buzzed with her response. I answered on speaker, trying to keep my voice steady as I spoke to her. "Emma, thank God I reached you." Sarah's voice echoed with practiced concern. "The server's been breached. Client files are at risk. We need you now." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said, already backing out of the bathroom. Another woman entered, and I left without another word, my heart racing as I moved through the ballroom. Outside, the cool night air hit my face, offering a brief moment of relief. I climbed into a taxi, the hum of the city's nightlife outside seeming far away from the chaos inside me. My phone buzzed with Jack's message. "Where are you? Boss is asking about the security contract." I didn't respond right away, instead typing a quick reply, "So is the contract." Then I turned off location sharing, slipped the engagement ring into the taxi's tip jar, and watched the glittering hotel fade in the rearview mirror. The driver's surprised eyes met mine in the mirror. "Bad night?" he asked. "No," I said, watching the building disappear. "Just the end of one." When I arrived at Sarah's apartment, she was waiting for me with 2 glasses of wine and a pint of chocolate ice cream. The determined look on her face softened when she saw me. I could feel the weight of everything that had just happened, but Sarah, being my best friend for years, could read me like no one else could. She knew something was wrong before I even said a word. "How bad?" she asked, handing me a glass of wine. "Digital evidence level bad," I replied, kicking off my heels and sinking onto the couch. I pulled out my phone and played the recording of Jack and Vanessa's conversation without any preamble. Sarah's face darkened as Jack's voice filled the room. "Planning weekend getaways while I was planning our wedding," I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. When the audio ended, Sarah refilled my glass without asking. "I'll help you bury the body," she offered, trying to lighten the mood. Despite everything, I laughed. It came out sharper than I meant it to, but it felt good to release the cold rage building inside me. "Nobody's more fitting for a digital forensics," Expert, I said, already pulling my laptop from Sarah's spare room. Protocol, ghost. Sarah's eyes widened. Protocol ghost? You're going full ghost on him, she asked, her voice rising with surprise. He's been lying to me for months, I said, pulling up the case file, fingers flying across the keyboard. This isn't impulse. This is self-preservation. As I connected my phone to the laptop, downloading every message, photo, and call record Jack had sent me over the past 6 months, I could already feel the adrenaline kick in. This was happening. I was taking back control. The next morning, I woke up with a cold clarity that had settled over me like a heavy fog. I hadn't slept much, but that didn't matter. I had a plan. A plan that, in some twisted way, was both a lifeline and a cage. The entire situation with Jack had been an intricate web of lies, but now it was all laid out before me. My evidence meticulously organized, ready for whatever came next. Sarah was already up, sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up as I made my way to the counter to grab a glass of water, but I could feel the tension in the air, the same way you can sense a storm before it hits. "You want to talk about what's next?" she asked, her voice calm, but I could hear the undercurrent of concern. "I've been thinking about it," I said, my voice steady. "I'm going to take him down, but I'm going to do it carefully. There's no going back after this. No one can know what happened between us." Sarah nodded, her face unreadable. "The financial stuff, it's worse than I thought," she added, tapping on her phone. "I've been going through the statements, the transfers from the joint account. It's clear he's been skimming money for months. And those weekend trips, those were never just about business, were they?" I swallowed hard. The realization that Jack had been siphoning money from me for months, using our joint accounts to fund his secret life, was a betrayal of a magnitude I hadn't even considered. But it wasn't just the finances, it was everything. The lies, the manipulation, the way he'd made me believe in us, in the future we were supposed to build together, while he was planning a different future with someone else. "He's been moving money out of our savings for months," I said, running my fingers through my hair. "Small amounts, but they add up. He's been doing it so carefully I almost didn't notice. And those business retreats? That's where it all started, right after he met her." Sarah leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing. "That's not just cheating, Emma. That's fraud. It's embezzlement." "I know," I replied, my voice tight. "And that's why I need to be smart. I'm not just walking away from him. I'm going to make sure he pays for everything, for the lies, for the betrayal, for everything. He doesn't get to walk away from this unscathed. I've got to make sure he doesn't even see it coming." Sarah didn't say anything for a moment. Then she finally nodded. "You've got this. I'm with you. But you need to act fast. He's not going to sit around and wait for things to fall apart. The moment he realizes you're serious, he's going to do everything he can to cover his tracks. You need to make him think you're gone for good. Get his back against the wall." I didn't need Sarah to tell me that. I already knew what needed to be done. I had to erase every trace of my existence from Jack's life. But I wasn't going to make it easy for him. I was going to make him sweat. "Do you still have access to his firm's billing system?" I asked, my voice suddenly quiet. "I could use those records." Sarah raised an eyebrow, but didn't question me. "I have a few connections who can get me in," she said. "It'll be tricky, but it can be done. I'll work on it. You just focus on getting everything else in place." "Thanks," I said, feeling a moment of gratitude. Sarah had always had my back even when I didn't know how to help myself. Now, more than ever, I needed that loyalty. The day passed in a blur of phone calls, emails, and strategizing. By the time the evening rolled around, I had already begun the process of erasing my digital footprint. Social media accounts deactivated, email settings changed, and every account Jack had access to was locked down. I'd even gone as far as disabling location tracking and setting up new bank accounts. This wasn't just about ending our relationship, it was about reclaiming my independence. and making sure that nothing, not even Jack's manipulations, could reach me again. When I got the text from Jack that evening, it was just as I expected. "Where are you? I've been calling you. We need to talk." It was a generic message, one that would have made me worry a few weeks ago. But now, it didn't even faze me. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on what needed to be done next. The next phase of my plan was already in motion. The next few days felt like I was living in a different world, one that Jack wasn't a part of anymore. Every task, every move I made was carefully calculated. Nothing was left to chance. I couldn't afford to be careless. Jack had underestimated me for too long. Now, it was my turn to take control of everything. I had already spoken to Caroline, my law school friend who specialized in family law. I'd sent her everything: financial records, the audio of Jack's betrayal, and a timeline of his actions. She was clear-headed and professional, exactly what I needed. When we met, she barely batted an eye at the magnitude of the situation. "Well, he certainly picked the wrong woman to betray," Caroline said dryly as she poured herself a cup of coffee. "These financial discrepancies, though, they're more than just signs of infidelity. This is serious. The firm's going to want to investigate." I nodded, watching her as she read through the documents I handed her. "I don't want to destroy him," I said, my voice quieter now. "But he's going to be held accountable. And I'm not walking away empty-handed. He doesn't get away with this." Caroline looked up from the papers. "Of course not. You're entitled to what's yours. But if we're going to do this, we need to be strategic. We don't want to burn all your bridges in the process." The weight of her words settled in my chest. Caroline had always been someone I respected, and her advice meant more now than it ever had before. "What do you suggest?" "We proceed in 3 phases," she said, setting the papers down and meeting my eyes. "Phase 1, secure your assets. Make sure everything is locked down. Bank accounts, credit cards, anything Jack might have access to. Don't leave a trail for him to follow. Phase 2, release strategic information to the key parties, the firm, his family, anyone who needs to know. And Phase 3, if necessary, we take legal action, but only if it's the last resort." It was a relief to hear the plan laid out in such clear terms. I had always been a meticulous planner, and Caroline's approach gave me the structure I needed to move forward without hesitation. "Let's do it," I said, nodding firmly. "Let's make sure he understands that the consequences of his actions will follow him." We spent the next few hours going over every detail. Caroline helped me separate our joint accounts, ensured that Jack wouldn't have access to anything he could use against me, and guided me through the legal steps necessary to secure my position. By the end of our meeting, I felt like I had taken my first true step away from Jack, toward a future I would control. A few days later, Jack's panic started to seep through the cracks. His messages were relentless. "Where are you?" "I've called the office. They said you're not there." "What is this about? We need to talk." Each message was more frantic than the last, but I ignored them all. This was part of the plan. I hadn't spoken to him since I left the party, and I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of a response. He wasn't entitled to my time, not anymore. What he had done, what he had built his life around, was a far cry from the truth I had lived in for so long. There was no place for me in his version of reality anymore. As I prepared to meet with Caroline again, the doorbell rang. I froze. The timing was too perfect. I glanced at my phone. It was almost exactly the moment Jack would expect me to be home. I opened the door to find Sarah standing there, holding a stack of documents in her hand. She looked up at me with a raised eyebrow, but her gaze softened when she saw my expression. "Jack came by the office today," she said, stepping inside. "He's getting desperate, Emma. He's starting to get worried, asking if anyone has heard from you. He even asked me if I knew where you were staying." A cold shiver ran down my spine. "What did you say?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "I told him I hadn't seen you," Sarah replied, giving a shrug. I didn't say anything else. But you need to know he's starting to scramble. He'll probably escalate soon. That's fine, I said, a sense of calm washing over me. Let him escalate. Let him panic. It'll make things easier when the time comes. Sarah didn't press me for more details. Instead, she handed me the documents she had collected, including a list of all Jack's recent financial transactions. Everything was adding up. The bills, the jewelry purchases, the unexplained weekend trips. There was enough here to destroy him. But I wasn't going to destroy him. I was going to make sure he suffered the consequences of his choices. That night, I sat in front of my laptop staring at the screen. The financial records were all there, just waiting to be used. I could send them to the firm, leak them to the press, or even send them to his family. But none of that would be enough. I needed to hit him where it would hurt the most, his career. Jack had worked so hard for that promotion. He had dreamed about it, sacrificed for it. Now it was all crumbling beneath him, and he didn't even know it yet. I turned my attention to my own work. As much as this situation had consumed my mind, I couldn't let it derail my career. I had my own future to build, and I was determined to do it. I opened the email I had drafted earlier that day, the one I'd been hesitant to send. It was a proposal for a new client, one I knew would help me establish myself as an expert in digital forensics. I clicked send. The next step was already in motion, and nothing Jack did could stop me. A week passed, and I didn't hear from Jack. Not a text, not a call. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. It felt almost too quiet. The silence was suffocating in its own way. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for something, waiting for me to slip, to make a mistake. But I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Not anymore. I had already implemented the first 2 phases of my plan. All my accounts were secured, and the strategic information I had released had done its job. Michael from the firm had already started to ask questions. I knew it wouldn't take long before the firm's internal audit began. Jack was in deeper than he realized. Sarah kept an eye on the office for me. I had asked her to stay close to him without getting involved directly. She had a way of getting information out of people without them realizing it. I needed to know when Jack started to panic, when the cracks in his facade began to show. The message from Sarah came later that day. He's starting to crack, Emma. He's questioning the auditors, asking about what files are missing and who has access. It's obvious he's not in control anymore. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the message. The moment he realized that everything he had been doing, everything he had stolen, hidden, lied about, was about to come to light, I knew he would lose it. I almost felt sorry for him, but the thought quickly faded. He had made his choices, and now he would have to face the consequences. I spent the next few days in my new office working on my projects, attending meetings, and slowly building my new life. I was more than just a forensic expert now. I was becoming someone in my own right. The digital security firm I'd consulted for had already secured a new client, and my name was starting to gain traction in professional circles. The emails from my new clients were flowing in, and soon I would be fully booked with consultations. But as much as I immersed myself in work, there was always that small part of me that couldn't escape what had happened. The betrayal, the lies. I had built my entire life with Jack, and now nothing about that life was real. It felt strange to think about the woman I had been, the one who had walked into that anniversary party with dreams of a bright future. That woman was gone now, replaced by someone colder, sharper. I had started to keep the documents locked away in a secure drive, everything neatly organized. I knew Jack would eventually come looking for them. It was only a matter of time. And sure enough, I got the message that confirmed it. A new text came through on my phone. "Where are you? I'm at the office. You're not answering my calls. I need to talk to you about what's going on." It was just as desperate as the last ones, but something had changed. The tone had shifted. Jack wasn't just angry now, he was scared. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up the last file I'd saved. The emails, the bank transactions, the phone records, all of it was there, waiting. I had everything I needed to destroy him, but I wasn't going to do that. I had already made my choice. I opened the email draft I'd been working on, the one I had been afraid to send. It was a formal letter to Michael, outlining everything I knew: the financial discrepancies, the stolen client funds, the fabricated expenses. The evidence was irrefutable. That night, I met with Caroline again. She'd been invaluable in helping me navigate the legal side of things, but now I needed to make my next move. "I've got the evidence, Caroline, all of it, and I'm ready to release it," I said, my voice calm but firm. Caroline looked at me carefully. "You're sure about this?" I nodded. "I've waited long enough. It's time to take this to the next level. I want him to feel the full weight of what he's done." She hesitated for a moment. "You're playing a dangerous game, Emma. Once you go public with this, there's no going back. There's no going back for him either. His career, his reputation. It all ends." "I know," I said quietly, "but he needs to face the consequences, and I need to be free of him." I left Caroline's office later that evening with a renewed sense of purpose. The decision had been made, and now it was time to execute it. I took a deep breath, stepping out into the cool evening air. It was strange, this feeling of calmness. It wasn't the chaotic rush of anger I had expected, but a quiet clarity. I had always been methodical, and now the steps I had taken were leading me to exactly where I needed to be. The following day, I sent the email to Michael, to the audit team, to the firm's HR. Everything I had collected was laid out in full, ready for them to see. As I hit send, I could almost feel the weight of the action settling in. Jack wouldn't know what hit him, and as I sat back in my chair, I couldn't help but think of how much I had changed. The woman I had been a month ago, helpless, desperate for answers, was gone. This new version of me, the one who had found the strength to walk away from everything, was ready for whatever came next. The following week felt like a fog. I had made my move, and now all I could do was wait. The weight of the decision I'd made didn't fully hit me until I sat in my office, staring at the screen, knowing that everything had changed. Jack's empire, built on lies and deception, was crumbling, and I had a front row seat to watch it all unravel. But this time, I wasn't just a bystander. I had taken action, and now it was out of my hands. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a text from Sarah. "They're meeting about you at the firm. Michael's involved, and the audit team has started their review. It's happening." I stared at the screen, my heart thudding in my chest. It was really happening. The firm was finally looking into Jack's actions, and the consequences were about to unfold. As the hours ticked by, the silence in my office felt heavier than ever. I had done my part, and now all I could do was wait. It was the kind of waiting that gnawed at you, the kind that had you second-guessing your decisions. But I knew this was the right path. Jack didn't deserve anything less. At the same time, I couldn't deny the strange sense of satisfaction that lingered. The satisfaction of knowing that I had found the courage to stand up for myself, to no longer be the woman who was blind to her own worth, to no longer accept betrayal as a part of love. I opened my inbox. A message from Michael Roberts, the senior partner who had always been so quick to praise Jack. Now he was reaching out to me for answers. "Emma, we need to speak. The audit team has uncovered serious discrepancies, and I need your insight into these findings. Can we meet tomorrow morning?" I stared at the message for a long time before responding. I knew what this meant. This was the turning point. The firm was finally facing the reality of what Jack had been doing behind the scenes. They were no longer blind to it. They were going to have to deal with it, and I was the one who had given them the tools to see it. I tapped out a response, keeping it professional, keeping it controlled. "Of course. I'll be at the office at 10 a.m. We can discuss the details then." When I arrived at the office the next morning, I was greeted by the buzz of activity. The air felt thick with tension, but I held my head high. This was it, the moment where everything would come to a head. Michael's office was on the top floor overlooking the skyline. I could see the city stretching out below me, a sprawling sea of concrete and glass. But in that moment, I wasn't thinking about the view. I was thinking about the path that had led me here, about the strength I had found when I thought there was none left. Michael stood as I entered his office. His expression was unreadable, his usual warm smile replaced by something more serious. "Emma," he said, his voice low, "thank you for coming in on such short notice. We've been reviewing the materials you provided, and I have to say, the findings are more than we expected." I nodded, trying to remain calm. "I've been working with the audit team. I knew it would be serious, but I didn't realize the extent of what Jack had been doing." Michael sighed, running, a hand through his hair. "This is going to be difficult. We're going to have to move quickly, but we need to make sure everything is done by the book. We can't afford any mistakes, especially with the media watching." I met his gaze, unwavering. "I understand, but Jack needs to be held accountable for his actions. This isn't just about the firm, it's about everything he's done. He's lied, he's stolen, and he's used people to get what he wanted." Michael hesitated before responding. "You're right, and I'm glad we have you on our side. I'll be in touch soon, but for now, we'll need you to prepare a formal statement. We'll need your full cooperation to make sure this is handled properly." I nodded, already mentally preparing myself for the next steps. "I'll get it to you by the end of the day." As I left Michael's office, the weight of the situation pressed down on me. This wasn't just a legal matter anymore. It was personal. Jack had tried to destroy my life, to make me feel small, insignificant. But now, it was my turn to make sure he felt the full weight of his actions. When I got back to my office, I sat at my desk, staring at the screen. The statement I needed to prepare was simple: a detailed account of Jack's actions, the financial discrepancies, and the stolen client data. But the weight of what I was doing hit me in waves. As much as I wanted to, I couldn't pretend this wasn't difficult. There were emotions buried beneath the surface that I had worked so hard to suppress. But I couldn't afford to let them show. I couldn't let my emotions cloud the mission I had set for myself. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about taking control of my own life and making sure Jack could never hurt me or anyone else again. I typed the statement. Each word, an assertion of everything I had learned over the past few weeks. Every fact, every piece of evidence was laid bare. Jack couldn't hide anymore. He couldn't spin his lies into truths, and when I finished, I clicked send. The next few days were a whirlwind. The firm had moved quickly. Michael's calls had become more frequent, and the audit team had been working around the clock. Jack's world was crumbling, and I couldn't help but feel a certain detachment as I watched it unfold. It wasn't anger that I felt. It was something deeper. It was the satisfaction of knowing that justice, in its own quiet way, was finally being served. But even as the situation with Jack escalated, I couldn't ignore the sense of emptiness that lingered. There were moments when I caught myself thinking about the life we had built, about the plans we had made. I had been so certain that Jack was the one. I had believed in our future with the same fervor that I now directed toward dismantling everything he had done to deceive me. It wasn't just about the money or the lies anymore. It was about everything he had taken from me: trust, love, and security. He had built a facade, and I had fallen for it. But now, I was tearing it down piece by piece. And though the act of doing so brought a strange sense of power, it also brought a sharp pang of loss. The first real confrontation came sooner than I had expected. A text from Sarah. "Jack's trying to get to you through other channels. He's been calling your work, and now he's reaching out to your friends. He knows you're involved in the investigation, but he doesn't know how deep it goes." I stared at the message for a while. my mind racing. I had known this would happen. Jack wasn't going to sit idly by. The panic in his messages had been building, and now it had taken a more personal turn. He was trying to regain control, but he didn't know where to turn. I immediately called Sarah. "What's the next move?" I asked, my voice tight. "We'll keep the pressure on him," Sarah said confidently, "but you need to be careful. He's going to try and manipulate anyone he can to get to you. If he can get someone in the firm to doubt you, it'll be a game changer. Stay alert." "Understood," I replied. "I'm not backing down now. He doesn't get to win." I knew Sarah was right. Jack was the master of manipulation. He had played everyone around him for so long, it was second nature. But this time, I wasn't going to let him manipulate me or anyone else anymore. The following week, I got another email from Michael. This time, it was more formal, almost curt. "Emma, the firm has decided to put Jack on temporary leave while we complete the investigation. His position is under review, and we will be conducting a full audit of his accounts. We will keep you informed of any developments." It was only a matter of time before this became public. The firm couldn't sweep it under the rug forever. The financial misconduct was too serious, the embezzlement too evident. Jack's position in the firm was no longer secure, and the walls were closing in on him. But even as the firm began its official proceedings, I knew there was still more work to be done. I had started looking into other clients Jack had worked with, digging through the digital footprints he had left behind. Every email, every file, every transaction, they all told a story of a man who had crossed every boundary, every line of professional ethics. And I would make sure that story was told. No one would be left in the dark. By the time I met with Caroline again, the pieces were falling into place. The first phase of the investigation was nearly complete. The firm was preparing to make an announcement about Jack's suspension. But there was still the matter of the financial discrepancies and his fraudulent activities that had been uncovered. Those were not small mistakes. They were deliberate actions designed to enrich himself at the expense of others. "Have you thought about what comes next?" Caroline asked me, her voice calm but serious. "The firm's going to want your statement. They're going to want to know how much you were involved in his actions. And you're going to have to be careful about how you present yourself." "I've been thinking about it," I said, running my fingers through my hair. "I've made it clear that I wasn't involved in any of this. I was blind to it, but I'm not letting him get away with it. This has been too much, too many lies, too much manipulation. I'm not letting him ruin my life any longer." Caroline nodded, her expression softened by understanding. "You've done the right thing. And whatever happens next, you've already won. Jack doesn't get to control your future anymore." I knew she was right. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. The weight of the past few months, the pain, the betrayal, the endless lies, was beginning to lift. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was moving forward. The day the official announcement came was a blur. I sat at my desk, reading through the emails from Michael and the firm's legal team. Jack had been suspended pending further investigation. His financial discrepancies had been thoroughly documented, and the firm had already begun the process of cutting ties with him. As I read the words on the screen, I felt a strange emptiness. I had expected to feel relief or even triumph, but instead, there was just a quiet sense of finality. Jack was done. The life we had built together was gone, and I was free. That evening, I received a call. It was from Jack's mother. Eleanor had always been kind to me, always made me feel welcome in their family, but I knew this call wasn't going to be easy. I had hoped she wouldn't call, but deep down I knew she would. "Emma," she said, her voice trembling. "Jack told us everything. He said you were behind all of this, that you're the one who caused everything to fall apart." I took a deep breath. "Eleanor, I know how much you care for him, and I respect that. But you have to understand, what Jack did wasn't just about mistakes or misunderstandings. It was deliberate. He lied to me. He lied to all of us, and he used his position to manipulate people." Her silence stretched for a long moment before she spoke. Again, "I don't know what to say. I've always believed in him. But now I don't know." "I'm sorry," I said softly. "I never wanted it to be this way. But Jack has to face the consequences of his actions. It's the only way for him to ever understand what he's done." There was a long pause before Eleanor finally spoke again. "I know, but I don't think I can ever forgive him for what he's done to you, to all of us. You deserve so much better, Emma." "I know," I said quietly, a sense of finality settling in my chest, "and I'm moving forward." The next few days felt surreal. Jack's suspension was no longer just a rumor, it was reality. And with it came the whispers, the gossip, the subtle shifts in the office dynamics. There were still people who sided with him, people who believed in his charm, in his version of events. But I didn't care anymore. Their opinions no longer mattered. What mattered was the truth, and the truth was that Jack had betrayed everyone who had ever trusted him. The firm was moving forward with its investigation, but I knew it was only a matter of time before it became public. I had done everything I could to ensure that Jack would never hurt me or anyone else again. But even as the walls closed in on him, I knew that the hardest part was yet to come. I spent most of the following week preparing for what came next, the legal proceedings. Caroline had been a huge help, guiding me through the process, helping me gather everything I needed for the court cases that would inevitably follow. Jack had crossed too many lines for there to be any hope of him walking away unscathed. Still, I wasn't naive. I knew he would fight back. He wasn't the kind of man who would accept defeat quietly. The damage he'd caused, both professionally and personally, would be something he would fight to cover up. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had nothing to hide, and I wasn't going to let him destroy me. The day of the hearing came faster than I expected. The firm had officially removed Jack from his position, and the legal team had prepared their case. I walked into the courtroom with my head held high, my mind focused. I wasn't there to win back some lost love. I was there to ensure that Jack would face the consequences for everything he had done. Caroline was there beside me, calm and composed as ever, ready to support me through every moment. She had helped me organize my thoughts, and today everything I had worked for was about to come to fruition. I had collected every shred of evidence I could find, every email, every financial transaction, every phone call. Jack's entire facade had crumbled, and now it was time for him to face it. The judge took his seat, and the court settled into an uneasy silence. I could see Jack sitting across the room, his usual polished appearance now tainted by the weight of his situation. He looked nothing like the man I had once known, the man who had whispered sweet promises into my ear and told me I was everything to him. Now he was a shell of that person, trying to hold on to whatever power he still had. Michael stood up first, addressing the court. "We are here today to discuss the actions of Mr. Jack Miller, whose actions have led to severe financial discrepancies, embezzlement, and a betrayal of trust that has affected not only this firm, but also countless clients. The evidence presented today will show the extent of his misconduct." The words rang in my ears as Michael spoke, and for the first time, I allowed myself to truly feel the weight of everything that had happened. But I didn't feel anger, I didn't feel hatred. I felt something else, relief, justice. When it was my turn to testify, I took a deep breath and stood before the court. My voice was steady as I spoke. I trusted Jack. I believed in him. But the truth is, he lied to me. He lied to everyone who cared about him. I was blind to what was going on, and when I found out, I was forced to make a choice. To stay in a relationship built on lies, or to stand up for myself and make sure that the truth came out. The room was silent as I continued, detailing the financial records I had uncovered, the conversations I had overheard, and the evidence that had shown the full extent of Jack's actions. Every word I spoke was the truth, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of power that I had never known before. The truth had become my weapon, and I was using it to reclaim my life. The hearing lasted several hours, and when it was over, the court adjourned to deliberate. I left the courtroom with Caroline, my mind buzzing with everything that had just transpired. Jack had been exposed, and there was no going back for him. But there was still one final step. I had to let go. As I stood in the hallway waiting for the verdict, I couldn't help but think about what had brought me to this point. It hadn't just been Jack's betrayal. It had been my own strength, my own ability to pick up the pieces and move forward. I had spent so long wondering if I was enough, if I could handle the truth when it came to light. Now I knew. A few days later, the verdict came. Jack had been found guilty of embezzlement and fraud. His career at the firm was over, and he would face legal action for the financial crimes he had committed. The court ruled in my favor, and the settlement was substantial. Jack would never be able to take anything from me again. I returned to my office, feeling an unexpected sense of peace. The battle had been long, and it had been hard, but now it was over. I had reclaimed my life, and in doing so, I had reclaimed my dignity. There was no more looking over my shoulder, no more wondering if Jack would come back and try to manipulate me again. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into that anniversary party months ago. I had changed. I had grown stronger, wiser. I had learned that the most important thing wasn't revenge. It was taking back control of my own future, one step at a time. As I sat at my desk, my phone buzzed with a new message from Michael. "Congratulations, Emma. The firm is pleased with how everything has been handled. We'll be in touch about future projects. You've truly impressed us." I smiled to myself. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was where I was meant to be. The weeks that followed were a blur of new beginnings. The weight of everything that had happened, Jack's betrayal, the court case, the fallout, slowly began to fade into the background. It wasn't that I had forgotten, but rather, I had learned how to move forward. Each day brought new challenges, new opportunities, and slowly, I started to feel like myself again. I focused on my work. It became my anchor, the one constant in a world that had shifted so dramatically. My reputation as a digital forensics expert was growing, and with it came new clients and new projects. The firm had approached me about taking on a high-profile case involving a breach of cybersecurity, and I dove in with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. But as I found my footing in my career, there was always the lingering thought of what had happened with Jack. I tried not to think about him, too. Often, but sometimes, my mind would wander back to the past. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted, the man who had destroyed everything. One evening, as I was wrapping up a meeting with a new client, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "I just heard from Jenna. Jack's been trying to reach you. He's still saying it was all your fault." I stared at the message for a moment, feeling a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. Jack, always trying to control the narrative, always spinning his lies, even now. But I wasn't that person anymore. The woman who had been broken by his words was long gone. I had learned to take my power back. I quickly texted Sarah back. "Tell Jenna I'm done with him. I'm done listening to his lies." For a moment, I thought about calling Jenna. After all, she had been the one who had always tried to make peace between us. She had been in the middle of everything, trying to hold her family together while I tried to hold myself together. But I knew it was pointless. There was nothing left to say. Jack wasn't going to change. He wasn't capable of it, and I couldn't keep letting him affect my life. The following week, I was invited to speak at a cybersecurity conference. It was a huge opportunity for me, one I had been working toward for years. As I prepared my presentation, I couldn't help but think about how far I had come. It wasn't just the professional accomplishments that mattered. It was the personal growth, the strength I had found in myself that meant the most. On the day of the conference, I stood backstage, looking out at the sea of faces in the audience. The anticipation was palpable, but I was calm. For the first time in months, I felt completely in control. This was my moment. When it was time to take the stage, I walked out, with my head held high. I could feel the eyes of the audience on me, but I wasn't intimidated. I was ready. As I spoke about the importance of digital forensics and cybersecurity, I could feel the words flowing easily. This was where I belonged. My passion for the work, my dedication to uncovering the truth, had led me here. It wasn't just about the technology or the cases. It was about the people, about protecting them, about giving them the tools to take back control over their own lives. After the speech, I received a standing ovation. The applause was overwhelming, and for a moment I allowed myself to soak it in. This was what it felt like to be truly seen. This was what it felt like to be recognized for my work, for my expertise, for who I was, not for who I had been with or what I had allowed myself to become. Later that evening, as I was heading back to my hotel, my phone buzzed. Again, this time it was a message from Daniel. "Great job today. You were amazing up there. I'd love to continue our conversation about the Westlake case. How about dinner tomorrow night?" I smiled as I read the message. Daniel had become a colleague I respected and admired. Our professional relationship had developed naturally, and now it was clear that we were building something more. He wasn't like Jack. He didn't try to control me or manipulate me. He simply respected me for who I was, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could truly be myself with someone. The next night, we met for dinner at a small restaurant near the conference venue. The atmosphere was relaxed, the food delicious, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about everything: work, life, our shared love of hiking, and even the occasional awkward encounter at industry events. It was the most natural, comfortable conversation I'd had in ages. As the evening drew to a close, Daniel walked me back to my hotel, his presence calming and steady. We stopped in front of the entrance, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. "I really enjoyed tonight," Daniel said, his voice soft. "I feel like we've got a great connection." I nodded, my heart fluttering slightly. "I feel the same way." There was a brief silence before he spoke again. "Would you like to go hiking this weekend? I know a trail that's supposed to have an amazing view of the city. Thought you might enjoy it." The invitation felt light and easy, and I found myself smiling. I'd love that. As I entered my hotel room that night, I felt something shift inside me. It was the first time in a long while that I felt like I was moving forward, not just in my career, but in my life. I was finally starting to embrace the idea of new beginnings, of moving on, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. For so long, I had been living in the shadow of my past, but now I was starting to step into the light, and it felt good. The weekend arrived with a welcome sense of calm. I hadn't realized how much I needed a break from the whirlwind of the past few months until I found myself walking along a hiking trail with Daniel. The city stretched out below us, the skyline a glittering sea of lights. We walked side by side, our conversation flowing easily, punctuated by occasional pauses where we simply enjoyed the silence of the evening. It was the kind of peaceful moment I hadn't had in a long time. "How did you get into cybersecurity?" Daniel asked, his voice breaking the quiet as we paused to admire the view. I thought for a moment, the question taking me back to a time before all the chaos. "It started in college," I said, looking out over the city. I was always fascinated by the idea of digital forensics, the idea that everything leaves a trace, every email, every file, every interaction. It's like solving a puzzle. And I guess, in a way, I've always liked puzzles. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. I can see that. You've got a real passion for it. I smiled, the familiar thrill of talking about my work warming me. Yeah, I do. I guess I always wanted to help people by using technology to make things right, especially when people don't know they need help. We continued walking, and I could feel the weight of everything that had happened in the past few months beginning to lift. With each step, I felt a little more like the person I was before Jack, before all the lies. It was strange, but in a way, I felt freer than I ever had. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter, more at peace. I had made it through the hardest part. The court case, the fallout, the months of uncertainty, it was all behind me. I could finally breathe again. And as I thought about the future, I realized that it was mine to shape. Daniel texted me later that day, asking if I wanted to grab coffee before heading back to the city. I agreed without hesitation. We met at a small cafe tucked away from the bustle of the conference crowds. As we sat across from each other, sipping our drinks, I found myself feeling more connected to him than I'd expected. There was a warmth between us, something genuine and unforced. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could open up again. You've been through a lot, Daniel said, breaking the comfortable silence. I can see that, but you're stronger for it. It's clear in the way you talk about your work. I looked at him, surprised by his perceptiveness. I don't know about that, I said, shaking my head. I think I'm still figuring it out. I guess you never really know how strong you are until you have to be. He smiled, a small but sincere expression. I get that, but from what I can see, you're handling it all with a lot of grace. I shrugged, not entirely sure how to respond. I guess I've had to. There was a time when I didn't know how I was going to get through it, but now I just take it one day at a time. We sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, the weight of my past lingering but no longer controlling me. It was as if the first part of my life, everything that had led up to this point, had come to a close, and now I was writing a new chapter. As I walked back to my hotel later that afternoon, I passed a familiar street corner. The same one I'd walked past so many times with Jack, the place where we had shared so many quiet moments. But this time, I didn't stop. I didn't look back. It was a strange feeling, that quiet finality. I hadn't realized how much I had been holding on to until I let go. Jack, the life we had built, everything we had planned. It was all in the past now. And with that weight lifted, I felt lighter, freer. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about moving forward, about embracing the future instead of clinging to a past that no longer served me. That evening, I received a message from Michael. It was short, professional, but there was a sense of finality in his words. Emma, the firm is officially distancing itself from Jack. His role has been permanently revoked, and all outstanding legal matters are being handled by our legal department. Thank you for your patience and professionalism throughout this process. Your contribution has been invaluable to us. I sat back, reading the message a few times before putting my phone down. It was over. Everything had been handled, and I was free to move on. There was a sense of closure in Michael's words. And as I reflected on everything that had transpired, I realized that, for the first time in months, I felt at peace. The next day, I met with Caroline one final time. She had been with me throughout every step of this journey, providing legal advice, emotional support, and the unwavering belief that I could overcome everything. She had become more than just a lawyer. She had become a friend. So, what's next for you? She asked as we sat across from each other in a quiet cafe. I thought for a moment, the question settling in. I don't know yet, I said, looking out the window. I'm just going to keep doing what I love. I want to keep helping people, keep pushing forward. I want to build something that's mine, something I can be proud of. She smiled. You will. I have no doubt about that. As we finished our coffee, I realized that Caroline was right. The future was mine to create, and I wasn't going to let anything or anyone hold me back. The following weeks passed in a blur of new projects and opportunities. My name was starting to gain more recognition in the cybersecurity field, and I began speaking at more conferences and taking on high-profile clients. Each new success, each new achievement felt like a step forward into the life I was now creating, one that was all my own. But even as my career soared, I kept Daniel in my thoughts. We continued to meet, to talk, to explore the connection that had grown between us. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to think about the possibility of a future that didn't involve the shadows of my past. Months later, I found myself standing at the top of a building overlooking the city. It was the same view I had once shared with Jack, but it felt different now. This time, I was standing there on my own terms. The future was no longer a place filled with fear or uncertainty. It was a place of possibility, of freedom, of new beginnings. And as I looked out at the city below, I knew that whatever came next, I was ready for it. The days blended together, each one becoming a stepping stone towards a future I had once believed was out of reach. I felt the world shifting beneath me, each moment brimming with new possibilities. The sense of liberation that had come with the end of the legal battle and Jack's eventual downfall had been more profound than I had expected. The weight that had once crushed me was now gone, leaving room for something I had never fully realized I needed, a chance to reclaim my identity, to build a life that was entirely my own. I found myself diving deeper into the work that had once been a mere escape. Cybersecurity, digital forensics. It wasn't just a job anymore. It was my passion, my purpose. With each new project, I felt a growing sense of fulfillment. The clients I worked with began to trust me more, not just for my skills, but for the integrity I brought to every case. My reputation was becoming more solidified, and with it, the opportunities kept growing. One afternoon, as I was wrapping up a meeting with a new client, I received an unexpected text from Sarah. It was brief, but it made my heart race. "You won't believe this. Jack's trying to get back into the game. He's reached out to Bradford and Mercer. They're offering him a consultant position." I stared at the screen for a moment, a mix of disbelief and anger surging through me. Jack, always trying to worm his way back into something he didn't deserve, but as quickly as the anger rose, it dissipated. It didn't matter anymore. The world was moving forward and Jack was being left behind. He could try to rebuild whatever he had left, but he would never get back what he'd lost, and I wasn't going to waste any more energy thinking about him. I quickly texted Sarah back. "Let him. It doesn't change anything." In a way, I was glad to hear about Jack's new attempt to salvage his career. It meant that he was no longer a part of my world. He was out there, making his own choices, fighting for whatever scraps of success he could grasp. Meanwhile, I was building my own future, one where I controlled the narrative. As the months passed, I started feeling more settled in my new life. Daniel and I continued to spend time together, and the connection between us grew stronger with each passing day. It wasn't rushed, but it was easy, comfortable. For the first time in ages, I felt like I could truly trust someone again, without fear, without the shadow of Jack looming over me. Daniel had his own successes in his field, and his support had become a steady presence in my life. He didn't push me to talk about the past if I didn't want to, but when I did, he listened, without judgment, without trying to fix anything. It felt like the kind of partnership I had always wanted, one built on mutual respect and understanding. One evening, as we sat on my balcony looking out at the city below, Daniel turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You've come a long way, Emma," he said quietly. "I've seen you grow so much over the past few months. It's incredible." I smiled, leaning back against the chair, my fingers tracing the edge of my glass. "It's been a journey," I admitted, "but it's been worth it. I'm not who I was before. I've learned so much about myself." Daniel's gaze softened. "I can see that. You're stronger than you realize." It was the kind of compliment I didn't expect but truly appreciated. I had spent so long doubting myself, second-guessing my worth, trying to mold myself into someone I thought others wanted me to be. But now, I was finally stepping into who I was always meant to be, someone confident, capable, and at peace with my past. The turning point came one evening when I received an email from Michael Roberts, the senior partner at the firm who had been instrumental in guiding the investigation against Jack. He was inviting me to a private dinner with several high-profile clients who were looking for cybersecurity experts. The opportunity was big, the kind of chance I had dreamed about. As I sat at my desk, reading through the email, I felt a rush of excitement. This was the moment I had worked for. The recognition, the validation, it was all finally coming together. When I met Michael and the clients the following week, the conversation flowed effortlessly. They asked insightful questions, and I was able to give them answers that felt natural and confident. By the end of the evening, the clients were impressed, and I could see the potential for future collaborations. Afterward, Michael pulled me aside. "You did great, Emma. I knew you'd impress them. Your work speaks for itself." His words were a simple affirmation, but they meant more than I expected. For so long, I had doubted my abilities, questioning if I was truly good enough. But now, with each step I took, I was proving to myself that I was more than capable. I didn't need Jack's approval, and I certainly didn't need anyone else's to validate my worth. Later that evening, as I sat in my apartment, I thought back to the woman I had been a year ago, the woman who had been terrified of losing everything, the woman who had walked into that anniversary party with a heart full of hope and trust, only to have it shattered. She had been so unsure, so fragile. But she was gone now, replaced by someone stronger, someone who knew what it meant to fight for herself and win. I looked out the window, the city lights twinkling in the distance. There was so much ahead of me, so much I had yet to accomplish, and for the first time in a long time, I felt excited about the future. I had spent so much time focusing on what I had lost, but now I was ready to embrace what I had gained: independence, strength, and a future that was all my own. A few weeks later, Daniel and I went for another hike, this time in the mountains outside the city. The air was crisp, the sky clear. As we reached the summit, we sat down on a rock, taking in the breathtaking view. The silence between us was comfortable, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to simply be. "Are you happy?" Daniel asked, looking over at me with a soft smile. I thought about the question for a moment, my gaze drifting to the horizon. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I'm happy. I think I'm finally where I'm supposed to be." Daniel smiled, his hand brushing mine. "Good. You deserve to be." As we sat there together, I realized that happiness wasn't something I needed to chase anymore. It was something I had already found within myself. And with that, the last piece of the puzzle fell into place. The sun was setting as I stood at the edge of the balcony, looking out over the city. The soft hum of the evening, the distant sound of traffic, the gentle breeze, it all felt so peaceful, so final. I had spent so much of my life running from the past, from the pain, from the fear of being left behind. But now I stood here, fully present in this moment, no longer defined by what had been, but by what I had built. The journey had been long. It had taken me through dark places, forced me to confront truths I wasn't ready to face. But each step had been necessary. Each loss, each betrayal had shaped me into the woman I had become. I turned from the balcony, my eyes landing on the small table where a fresh glass of wine waited for me. Daniel had left earlier that afternoon to attend a client meeting, but he would be back soon. He always came back. Our relationship wasn't rushed, but it was real, grounded in the understanding that we were both whole on our own and that we simply added to each other's lives. I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. Another message from Sarah, this time short, and to the point. Guess who's trying to make a comeback at Bedford Tech? Vanessa. I couldn't help but smile as I read the message. Vanessa, Jack's ex, had always been a mystery to me. But she, too, was just another piece of the puzzle. I'd stopped caring about Jack and his world months ago, but I couldn't deny that I was curious about the way everything had fallen apart for him. And her. I didn't reply. The old Emma would have obsessed over this news, would have analyzed every detail, looking for a way to understand, to get closure. But the new Emma, this woman standing on the balcony at peace with her choices, didn't need that anymore. I wasn't going to waste another minute on the past. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I smiled, knowing exactly who it was. I opened the door to find Daniel, his familiar smile making my heart flutter, just like it had the first time we'd met. "Got the wine?" I asked playfully, raising an eyebrow. He held up the bottle with a grin. "You know me too well." We shared a quiet laugh as he walked inside, setting the wine down on the counter. There was an ease between us, a comfort that came from knowing that neither of us needed saving. We'd both arrived at this moment as independent, strong people, and now we chose to share our lives, not out of necessity, but because we truly enjoyed each other's company. Daniel poured the wine, and we clinked glasses, our eyes meeting in the kind of quiet understanding that had taken me so long to find. "To new beginnings," Daniel said softly. "To finding strength in the hardest of times," I added, my voice steady, filled with a confidence I had once only dreamed of. We sat down by the window, the warm light from the city spilling into the room. The future stretched out before me, vast and open. I didn't know exactly what it would hold, but I knew I was ready for it. The last few months had been a whirlwind of change, of painful lessons, of growth. But as I sat here, in this quiet moment, I knew that it had all been worth it. Every step, every decision had led me to this place. The woman I had been and the woman I had become were no longer two separate identities, but one. A woman who was strong, independent, and free. The city lights flickered softly outside, the world bustling on while I sat at peace in my little corner of it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally exhale. I had survived the storm, and now the calm was mine to savor. The past would always be a part of me, a reminder of where I had come from, but it no longer defined me. I was writing my own story now, one where I chose the path, where I chose my happiness. And as I looked out at the horizon, I knew that whatever came next, I was ready to face it head on.